Glorified charms are a scrapped concept for Hollow Knight's Godmaster update. Today we'll be taking a look at how this feature might have been implemented had it not ended up on the cutting room floor. My name is Holland, and this is a fan-made interpretation of Hollow Knight's Glorified Charms. Glorified Charms. Prove yourself and uncover a whole new depth to your charm collection. So far as I'm aware, those were the first and final words ever publicly spoken about this long-lost feature. Luckily for us, Reddit user Just Using the Web created a mock-up of the glorified charm system, along with ideas for the glorified versions of every single charm in the game. So let's go through his interpretations of the glorified charms, to figure out whether or not these ideas would fit into the game. 3 quick things before we begin. I've made a video series rebalancing every charm in the game, and I'll be referring to it throughout this video. There will be a link to the series down below. I'm very critical by nature, so apologies if I sound a little bit too harsh at times. And finally, some of the grammar in this Reddit post is very poor, so I'll be fixing mistakes throughout. There'll be a link to the original post down below. With all of that out of the way, let's begin. Okay, so here's how the system would function. After having completed the first 3 Pantheons in Godhome, a chest would appear next to the Hall of Gods. This chest would contain a glorified charm notch, bringing you from 11 notches up to 12. This glorified notch would function just like any other charm notch, however, it would also have a secondary effect, that being the ability to convert your first charm into its glorified counterpart. Now, I like this system for a bunch of reasons. It's simple, easy to intuit, and circumvents the issue of some charms being glorified before others, thus limiting your viable options until you've collected all of the glorified charms. With the glorified charm notch, all of your charms have the potential to be glorified, although you can only have 1 glorified charm at a time. I think that's a pretty solid system. Then the creator lists his suggestions for how each charm would function when glorified. Some charms even having 2 potential options to choose from. When going through these concepts, I'll try to focus more on the idea behind that upgraded version and less on the specific numbers. I think that's both more fun and more useful. First up, the Wayward Compass. When glorified, it would either reveal the layout of the room you're currently in, given that you have not already filled it out on the map, or it would show you the locations of nearby relics. While both of those are pretty cool, I think I like the idea of showing relics better, since filling out your map isn't too difficult, especially by the time you've completed the 3rd Pantheon. Whereas finding those sneaky relics can be quite the task. Actually, this idea is vaguely similar to the Arcane Compass from my Charm Forging series, just being limited to only showing relics. All in all, I like the idea a lot. Then we have the Gathering Swarm, which just gets an increase to the speed of the flies. Simple but solid for exploration. For the Stalwart Shell, you now gain invincibility for 3 whole seconds upon taking damage. Now, if you've watched me rebalance Hollow Knight's charms, you'll know that I don't much like the design of Stalwart Shell. I think it promotes an unhealthy playstyle, that being tanking the boss while ignoring its mechanics. As such, I'm not too big a fan of this glorified concept. I do think the charm requires a full rework. Then we have the Soul Catcher, which starts a very cool trend of some charms getting new combat-related abilities. These are really fun to look at, and the reason I wanted to make this video in the first place. When hitting enemies with a spell, the spell will now recover some soul for each enemy hit, up to a maximum of 3 enemies at a time, recovering 12% soul. Now, I do believe 12% is just meant to be taken as 12 soul. It seems like the creator accidentally referred to everything in percentages. In either case, I think this effect is very cool. It is sort of like a win more condition, which disproportionately rewards players who can hit their spells, but I think the effect is cool enough to justify that. I like it because it's not just a raw increase in numbers, but an ability you have to take into account when playing. It's good stuff. Now, on the topic of raw increases in numbers, the glorified Shaman Stone now deals 50% damage. I assume in relation to Vengeful Spirit and Shade Soul. Given that the other spells already receive around a 50% bonus, presumably those other spells would receive an even larger benefit. Well, you would certainly need to nerf the base version of Shaman Stone, or you'd likely never see anyone glorify their Soul Catchers or other weaker charms. Soul Eater gets approximately the same treatment as Soul Catcher, although with a slightly higher return on successful hits. As for Dash Master, it now decreases the cooldown of your dash even further, while also recharging your Shade Cloak faster. Now, I love this idea, and I actually rebalanced the base version of Dash Master to do this very thing in part 5 of my charm reworks. So, suffice it to say, I think it's an awesome effect. It would definitely make Dash Master feel much more appealing to those of us who don't dash particularly often during combat. Yet another change related to my rebalances is Sprint Master. Man, you'd think I ripped all of my ideas straight from this post. It now applies the movement speed increase while in the air, unless this would break platforming, which was my concern as well. I do think the charm would feel better to use if it also worked mid-air, so I like the change. Although I'm not quite sure whether it should be a glorified exclusive, feels more like a quality of life to me. Grub Song now gives 20% soul when you take damage. See, given that it's usually 15 soul, not 15%, just 15, I'm tempted to believe that this is what the creator meant too. It's just a slight buff, nothing much to note here. The Grubberfly's Elegy Beams now deal 75% of the nail's damage, up from 50%. Now, I do believe Grubberfly's Elegy has an unfortunate activation criterion that really punishes everyone but the very best players. You can hear me talk more about that in the reworking series. Otherwise, no comment. Heart now gives you 3 masks instead of only 2, which is the very same change I suggested for the base version. So, hooray! Greed becomes significantly more impactful, going from 20% all the way up to 90% extra geo received. Damn. As for strength, oh boy, oh goodness. 75% extra damage, are you crazy? No one would ever glorify anything else. Being one of the most powerful and overused charms in the game, I very much believe that strength needs a heavy nerf. 75%, man, are you serious? Spell Twister now decreases the cost of spells by 50%, meaning you can cast 2 spells at the cost of 1. That's pretty freaking powerful. Steady Body now nullifies knockback when hit, which is similar to the secondary effect of Stalwart Shell. Interesting, I don't know exactly what to think about that. That's kinda cool, I suppose. And now for my absolute favorite charm, Heavy Blow, which gains an increased knockback of 50%. Sorry, it goes from 50% to 75%, but the wiki says it's already at 75. Similarly to Stalwart Shell, I think this charm has a fundamentally flawed design. If you want to know how I'd rework Heavy Blow, you can find that in the reworking series. Quick Slash goes from a 35% attack speed increase to 45%. Now, I'm not quite sure 35 is actually the correct number. I believe it's closer to 60%. But given that there are multiple components to the attack speed calculation, people tend to disagree about the exact increase percentage. Regardless of the true number, Quick Slash is an overpowered charm, and I would certainly suggest nerfing the base version before giving it an even more powerful glorified buff. Oh, and secondarily, you can now hold down the button to attack continuously. Not sure how I feel about that. Also, how do I use a nail art then? Long Nail and Mark of Pride now also apply to nail arts, which is also something I've previously suggested they should do. Fury of the Fallen would activate at 1 or 2 masks, which is certainly a step in the right direction. I've suggested that it might activate even at 3 masks, but then get increasingly more powerful as you get closer to death. I have to remember that these aren't rebalances, but glorified effects. It's kind of hard for me to distinguish between the two, actually. Thorns of Agony just gets increased damage, Boulder Shell gets 2 more charges, Fluke Nest gets increased damage, Defender's Crest gets more damage, Glowing Womb gets more oh, hold on. or consumes less soul. That's interesting. Now, Quick Focus gets a really cool new effect, that being the ability for you to use it while mid-air, although presumably while still being affected by gravity. I really like that actually. Think about how many places you could start using focus earlier and thereby sneak in a heal where you otherwise couldn't. See, if glorified charms were actually to become a thing, I like the idea of giving the charms slightly different abilities more than just increasing their raw numbers. Deep Focus would become even slower but gain the ability to restore 3 masks. That is very powerful, but I kinda like it. The Lifeblood charms would just give more Lifeblood masks. Hiveblood would be able to restore all of your masks one by one. Yes please, I love this. Definitely a welcome change. Or glorification, I suppose. Spore's Room gets more damage, so does Sharp Shadow. Shape of Un wouldn't reduce your movement speed anymore, which is cool. Nailmaster's Glory would now also increase the damage of the nail arts. I actually don't hate that. Weaver Song would deal more damage or summon an additional Weaverling. Dreamwielder would give you enough soul for 3 spells. That's a lot of soul. The Dream Shield would give you an additional shield. Neat. Grimchild would, in its final 4, become a waking mini-Grim that follows you, sit on the bench with you, and do mini-versions of Grim attack. Just kidding. Team Cherry would never do that, unfortunately. Alright, I'm not sure quite what I just read. Let's just go with the other option, the double damage. I do kind of like the name Grim Jr. for Grimchild. Anyway. Carefree Melody would have a higher chance to gain a charge. I do not like RNG, so please get this charm out of my sight. And finally, King Soul would restore twice the soul that it currently does at the same rate. That is certainly one way to make it more appealing. And there we go, that is every charm in Hollow Knight glorified. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Yes, I do know that Silksong is out, but I'm far from the only person who hasn't finished it yet, and I'd like to give people something to watch that doesn't run the risk of spoiling anything. So please, if you would, keep Silksong out of the comment section. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.